another brief video on the new book by Brandon Smith, myself, and Kurt Smith, The Gospel Heritage of Georgia Baptists, 1772 to 1830. And the third chapter that I wrote was concerning the atonement, particular atonement. What does that mean? And historically, did Baptists in the state of Georgia hold to a doctrine of Christ dying particularly for the elect? Now, this doctrine is often much maligned and struggled with by many, but we're going to see that early Georgia Baptists saw it as a necessary doctrine in salvation if we understood the Scripture correctly. Now, previously we had talked about Daniel Marshall, Abraham Marshall, and Jesse Mercer. And Daniel Marshall was very clear in the writing of the creed or confession for the Kiowa Church that particular election was of the utmost importance. And so when you see that phrase, particular election, this is a phrase that many of the early Baptists would use in the state of Georgia to talk about particular atonement. God's election of a people was particular, eternal election. And that particular people were the ones that were going to be converted or saved ultimately. Now, not only did Daniel Marshall hold to this doctrine, but later Abraham Marshall, his son, once again, with several other men putting together the Abstract of Decorum, they wrote a very succinct statement on particular election or particular atonement. In paragraph 3, they say, "By the decree of God, for the manifestation of His glory, some men and angels are predestinated." Paragraph 4, "These angels and men predestinated and foreordained are particularly and unchangeably designed, and their number so certain and definite that it cannot be either increased or diminished." Now, not only did the Georgia Baptist Association hold that view of particular atonement, basically saying that the number of the elect was fixed by God's decree and could not change, but also 6 other associations held that view. And then there was another document called the Abstract of Principles, which was a creed that was held by several other Georgia Baptist associations or Baptist associations in the state of Georgia that simply said, "We believe in the doctrine of eternal and particular election." So you have all of the associations by 1830 hold to some view of particular atonement based off the Abstract and Decorum or the Abstract of Principles. And they're both stating that there is a particular number of people that God has designed to save, and that the work of Christ will accomplish their salvation and their salvation alone. We also need to know that additionally more than 400 Baptist churches statewide by 1830 subscribed to a specific creedal statement on particular redemption. And this was through associational membership. So you could not be a part of an association that held to the doctrine of particular atonement if your church did not hold to the doctrine of particular atonement. We see this furthermore later on in the Flint River Association, when the Flint River Association addressed the issue in a circular letter by John Milner. Now, circular letters were letters written by one or several of the men in the association from different pastorates or churches, that these letters address different doctrinal issues and sometimes issues of practice. But this particular letter in the Flint River Association, authored by John Milner, employs numerous scriptures to declare God's choice of sinners first from eternity past. Milner concluded Scripture did not teach a general atonement, but a particular atonement due to God's choice before the foundation of the world. But it intends, Milner wrote, an eternal election of particular persons to everlasting life and salvation, unquote. Salvation was purposed by God for a definitive number of persons who were called His people, also referred to as Christ's sheep. Milner denied the word world in Scripture in context with Jesus' sacrifice intended a general atonement. He said that Jesus announced the wide gate leads to destruction and many enter by that gate. Also, he commanded men to enter the narrow gate which leads to life, and few enter by it. Furthermore, providence proved not all men are saved. Quote, "If therefore he cannot be disappointed of his purpose, since many do perish, it could not be his design that the atonement should extend farther than the application should be made." Unquote. He argued election was the preordained plan, and for Christ to be the propitiation for unbelievers would overextend the design. In other words, Christ would fail to accomplish his work because he made atonement for individuals that would never be forgiven. This doctrine was not something that the men took lightly. They didn't look at the doctrine and say, well, it's difficult, so we're not going to really argue about it or debate it or even discuss it. No, they took it seriously enough to try to work on it carefully, even though some men among them did not hold to every distinction inside the doctrine of particular atonement. They made it clear that to be a part of the associations and to be a part of early Georgia Baptist churches, you needed to hold to this doctrine that Christ died for the elect.